Hi, this is Dr. Karen Becker, and today we're going to discuss Cushing's disease. This is the first of a three-part series. Cushing's disease was originally diagnosed by Dr. Harvey Cushing in 1932, hence the name. I do prefer the correct title of what's happening with this syndrome, which is hyperadrenocorticism. That's actually a bigger word, but much more descriptive. What that means, hyper, too much, adrenal, from the adrenal glands, cortisol, which is exactly what the syndrome dictates. It's too much adrenal release of the hormone cortisol. And cortisol is your pet's fight or flight hormone. And cortisol is designed to be released by your pet's adrenal glands in very small amounts. And when there's an upregulation of cortisol demand, then your pet can begin producing cortisol in high amounts, which can, of course, is toxic to the body. So cortisol really is a very important hormone. It's a part of your pet's fight or flight response. And cortisol is designed to be released in small amounts from the adrenal gland when the body perceives stress. So ultimately speaking, the end result of cortisol release is a glucose release from the liver, and glucose, being sugar, is what provides energy to the muscle cells so that your pet's able to escape a bear, or a kitty can run up a tree if being chased by a dog. It helps your pets ready their bodies to be able to either turn and address confrontation or be able to get away in a life-threatening situation. That really is the big reason why pets have cortisol. However, cortisol influences a whole host of other biochemical parameters, and actually it influences the body in a whole host of negative ways. Cortisol is also linked to regulation of blood pressure. Cortisol can negatively influence electrolyte balance. Cortisol is immunosuppressive, so it can negatively impact your pet's immune system long term. Cortisol has a negative interaction between bone and fat metabolism. So needless to say, we are thankful that we have cortisol in our pets' bodies in small amounts, but the goal is to help your pets not oversecrete cortisol, which becomes a toxic situation. Chronic cortisol release really translates into chronic signs of stress in your pet. And what we mean by chronic signs of stress, keep in mind there's no such thing as really good stress for your pet and really bad stress. It's all stress. So your pet is having the same physiologic response, whether you're dropping them off at the groomer, they've been hit by a Mack truck, they get all excited because you're serving them steak for their birthday dinner and they weren't expecting that, a divorce in the family, an addition of a new dog, having a large wound, dealing with the inflammation of cancer or an allergic response, that's all the same stress. So we'd like to think of it as, well, my pet doesn't really have stress. I move him from place to place and he travels with me all the time in a brand new environment. That's still actually considered to your pet's body a type of stress. So chronic stress, and therefore chronic cortisol release, ultimately results in elevated blood sugar long term, which can play into diabetes. It results in elevated blood pressure, which can be negative for your pet's cardiovascular system. Extreme hunger. When your pet's burning that much blood glucose, then your pet ends up being much more hungry than the average pet. Increased thirst and increased urination also come about when there's extra cortisol in your pet's system. There's an accumulation of fat in the abdominal area, as well as thinning skin, poor thin hair coat, a change in the pigment in the color of your pet's skin, decreased muscle and bone mass, as well as increased risk for infection. And that infection can come about anywhere. So pets that have chronic cortisol release tend to be, we'll call them immunosuppressed, but really they end up being more exposed to oral infections, eye infections, gum infections, ear infections, urinary tract infections. So infection can really come about wherever your pet's body's weak link is. So it's not any one area, but animals that have recurrent infections or infections that just lag on, and your pet has a hard time getting rid of them, you need to be thinking about cortisol influencing your pet's ability to fight infection. So there's several different forms of Cushing's disease, and it actually can become really confusing for clients. So I'm going to try and spell it out in an easy to understand format today. So if you have a pet that's dealing with Cushing's disease, it's important you know exactly what's going on, and also to help you prevent Cushing's disease from occurring in your pets. The reason that there's so many different types of Cushing's disease is that there are several layers of your pet's adrenal gland. So depending on what layer of your pet's adrenal gland that's overproducing hormone, that's the type of Cushing's that your pet has. So traditionally speaking, the middle layer of your pet's adrenal gland, for typical Cushing's disease begins overproducing glucocorticoids. So the zona fasciculata is the middle layer of your pet's adrenal glands, and when that particular layer of the adrenal glands overproduces glucocorticoids, which can also be called steroids or cortisol or cortisone or the synthetic version that veterinarians can give orally, prednisone. When the adrenal glands overproduce cortisone, that's called typical Cushing's disease. And sometimes we can actually, the veterinary industry can induce Cushing's disease. Veterinarians can unknowingly induce Cushing's disease in pets by administering too high of doses or too long of administration course of oral prednisone therapy. So if your pet's on prednisone, that actually predisposes your pets to acquiring Cushing's disease. So typical Cushing's disease is too much cortisol. Atypical Cushing's disease comes about when the outer layer of the adrenal gland overproduces too many electrolyte balancing hormones. That's called aldosterone. Or the inner layer of the adrenal gland that can begin overproducing too many sex hormones. So atypical Cushing's disease, it comes about from the outer or inner layer overproducing mineralocorticoids, aldosterone, or sex hormones, estrogen, progesterone, and then testosterone precursors. So it's all very confusing. For traditional or typical Cushing's, which is too much cortisol in the system, there are also two types of traditional Cushing's. There's adrenal dependent and there's pituitary dependent. Hands down, the most common form of Cushing's disease in pets is the pituitary dependent form. About 85% of dogs that acquire Cushing's disease acquire the pituitary dependent form. What that means is that the pituitary gland, master gland in the brain, is sending too much adrenal stimulating hormone to the adrenal glands, and the adrenal glands are simply responding to the stimulus to produce more cortisol. In rare cases, in about 15% of cases, the adrenal glands acquire a tumor, and that's what causes the upregulation of cortisol production in the body. It's very uncommon for cats to acquire Cushing's disease, although they can. Absolutely much more common in dog breeds. And there are some breed predispositions. The terriers, unfortunately, are predisposed. That includes silky terriers, Yorkies, bull terriers, Boston terriers, as well as poodles, Dachshunds, and the American Eskimo dog, also known as Spitz. All have a predisposition genetically to acquire Cushing's. Keep it right here for our second video on how to manage Cushing's disease.